Okay, so I think we are now officially live on this Zoom call between me, Alia Cornish, CEO, Irish Rock Orchestra, and you, Peter Whelan, Artistic Director. Hello. Nice
Hello.
to meet you. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
People have been really looking forward to this. You've got quite a following. It's fantastic.
Great, feeling a bit nervous about these questions, but yeah, bring them on.
Yeah,
do
great.
my best.
Okay, so the first thing we need to do is just put a few disclaimers out there. So the first one is this is new technology. We're doing a Zoom call via Facebook Live, which sounds as confusing as it is. So there may be some hiccups with the technology. I'm hoping not, but for now it seems all good. So we're going with it. And the second thing is that there is about a 10-second time delay. So any comments or questions that are typed in, we'll be seeing those a bit late. So that's one thing to bear in mind if you're viewing this and you'd like to contribute. Peter, do you have any disclaimers that you'd like to chuck in at this point?
Yes, I should say early doors, that I live I'm in the middle of London, in central London, and it's great, super safe, a nice place to be. But they do taser training every so often outside my window. So that's basically one policeman wears a mattress, and then the trainee policemen and women who are not observing social distancing, I have to say, actually, that they then shoot at each other with real tasers and scream, taser, taser. And then the person dramatically falls to the ground. So you might suddenly hear that going off at a certain point, but don't be alarmed. There's nothing I've done wrong that I know of or that I'm being shocked for.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that. I really hope that we do get some of that within this interview today, but let's see how it evolves. Good. So lockdown, we're all in lockdown at the moment. A lot of us know about a bit of what you've been doing during this time, because of course we've seen the videos.
Yes. In fact, I'm sitting in the very location that some of you might recognize from some of the early videos. Yeah, this was the place. This is my my social media station with my nice picture from Colin McCatley over here. Sister of Aoife, or brother of Aoife, who's plays in frequently with IBO, wonderful cellist. So yeah. So I've been here, like everybody, kind of reinventing our lives and seeing what we could do. Early on, I did a few videos that seemed to do well online, but it was just mostly just to scratch an itch, just certain pieces I wanted to try out, a few bassoon pieces that I said would be fun to put together. And yeah, using that a cappella app, kind of stuck them together. First few were a disaster, and the first one, I was so embarrassed by my own singing that I changed it to another bassoon track, and then I kind of yeah, the longer you're away from people, the your kind of shame levels lower. So I started introducing some mildly offensive singer stereotypes in the later ones. But it's been good. It's sad times, of course. It's the world is changing a lot outside, and it's still how to find the best way to make ourselves useful and what can be of service to people. Like, we're still artists. It's our job to try and muster something up. It's a difficult one because, of course, like levity or funny videos were helpful to certain people. I remember some of the nicest comments were of people who have been working like nurses or at the front line, and said that it had cheered them up, or that they needed to see that this kind of level of humanity is there too. I understand as well that other people, of course, don't feel like in the headspace to be creative, and that's really understandable as well. I think we all have to kind of think about what's going to happen. If you ignore the outside world, there's like kind of lots for musicians. It's really interesting. Ali, I don't know if you find the same, that you're not. We've been on the road for like years, and suddenly you're at home, and that can go one of two ways. Like, you either love it or you're like crawling to get out. But for me, surprisingly, I thought it'd be more difficult than it is, and I'm just catching up with lots of reading, doing a bit of work, and I try to kind of keep different levels going, high level work and then lower level pursuits as well, that kind of keep me sane during the day.
As far as I'm aware, we are now live again. So thank you for being patient with us. Peter, you were just talking, I'm sorry that you were cut off in your flow, about people who've been watching the videos that you've been putting out and the sort of reaction that you've received.
Yeah, it was amazing. I wasn't expecting it to have so many hits as it did. And it was just then absolutely fascinating and terrifying to turn on your Facebook and just see the likes constantly, like little sound alerts. It was funny as well to see it going around the world and what different kind of cultures made of it. I had forgotten that the text of that particular cantata, the one with the two singers, actually sounded like I meant it to be vigilant against coronavirus, and that's what they read into. This is so lovely, and it passed around a lot of Lutheran churches who thought it was just like a wonderful message, and that was absolutely by accident. So yeah, different people from different cultures seem to read something very different into it, and also just like how singers and bassoonists, have a lot of bassoonist friends online, they take very different things from what they see.
Fantastic, thank you. And are you able to share any plans with us for maybe your next video?
I don't know. I feel like it's difficult to touch that like genre. So it's kind of too big a word for a little while. I think I've maybe done enough of that, and there's quite a lot going on in the world at the moment. But we have different plans. We're working on things with the Irish Baroque Orchestra. We were doing a little series about kind of a fun version of the history of Irish Baroque music, which is Irish Baroque Against the Clock. So we're working on that currently, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, behind the scenes, there's lots still, even though the world is in disarray, we're still planning for the future, how we're going to do things, and then looking to the future. Like the projects are still behind the scenes, trotting along in different ways. So that's kind of keeping me pretty busy as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So during this lockdown time, obviously you've been making these videos, but how else have you been passing the time? Have you been studying things, preparing things, or even just watching and reading stuff that you're finding at the moment?
Yeah, so I've been trying to do, as I say, highbrow and lowbrow things during the day. So at the start of the day, it's like business up front. I'm doing my lot of reading, kind of more nerdy pursuits, like doing my continual work stuff I should have done years ago, reading historical books and treatises and things like that. As the day progresses, it goes downhill, and kind of end the day, generally speaking, watching like Netflix, Simpsons, trying to like get through that. So yeah, it's a very yeah, it's a downward trajectory through the day for me in terms of culture.
That's fantastic. A lot of people have been wondering the same question, actually. Obviously, you before you came to the IBO as artistic director, you were a bassoonist, and you still are a bassoonist, of course. A lot of people are wondering if you were already a competent keyboard player and a continuo player before you moved into this role, or whether that's something that you really had to work at.
Sure. So, I mean, I started out as a pianist, or like I had piano lessons when I was about 5, and that was my first instrument for a long time. And I remember just really wanting at a certain point to play in orchestra. You know, as a kind of a teenager, about like 13, 14, I really wanted to start, you know, playing in orchestras or chamber music. But piano isn't the best way to do that. And a bit too late to start a string instrument, and where I lived there weren't so many teachers. So yeah, ended up kind of like everybody falling into the bassoon trap. It's as they always say, it's like an instrument that chooses you, which is very true. You often just kind of stumble into it. And yeah, I think I initially kind of like many bassoonists, pointed at like normally it's kind of an endangered instrument scheme, and you're presented with like French horn, trombone, viola, double bass, oboe, bassoon, and I think I remember pointing at the oboe, but being given a bassoon because I'm tall and wouldn't complain too much about it.
Thank you so much for your patience. So for everybody that was watching the stream earlier and is now tuning into this video, I'm so sorry that the live video was curtailed. We don't know why, but it seemed the most sensible thing to do to carry on this interview, because Peter was really in his flow there. I'm sorry, Peter, that this has happened.
No worries.
We'll put the whole video up later. It does mean that we won't quite get the interactive element that we were hoping for, but actually we have a ton of questions, so I think we'll be okay for content. Peter, where were we? We were talking about the fact that you came to the IBO having been a bassoonist. You've
Yep.
been working on your continuo playing as a keyboard player, and you were just talking to us about that evolution.
Sure. Yes, so as I was saying, I started out the journey from being a pianist and wanting to collaborate with other people. And then through a kind of a scheme for more maybe endangered instruments, I ended up playing bassoon. And when I was a teenager, and that was a path that went quite quickly. You play bassoon, you're kind of more in demand with people and orchestras. And that was really fun to suddenly be on that kind of fast track into the music world. And playing bassoon with all its faults does give you like a big insight into playing bass lines, playing the harmony, and then on occasion stepping out into the limelight and being a soloist too. And definitely it's a kind of a training in singing and an appreciation like of all the different parts within an ensemble. So it's a chameleon in that kind of way. It can be whatever you want it to be. And I think that's a super useful instrument to have started out on. And then moving into the conducting or directing field sprang from that. After I did my youth orchestras, I studied in Basel in Switzerland, and there was two schools. There's a music school and then the Schola Cantorum across the courtyard from each other. So it's a brilliant place if you want to kind of dip your toe in the waters of early music and modern playing too. And I found that really fascinating. My heart was definitely drawn more towards the Schola Cantorum and the unusual creatures who lived there, who are like always just seemed a little bit more unhinged and fun. But yeah, both of them served their purpose. So yeah, so we're studying kind of historical music and the more contemporary world as well, the kind of orchestral training at the same time. But yeah, never quite like forgot my piano training, used my accompanying skills to earn some money when I was in college. And then, yeah, so it was there first and then kind of stayed throughout my career as something that was a fun way to make music on the side that didn't involve reeds or, yeah, getting kind of, yeah, it's hard work playing the bassoon. So it's kind of it was a downtime instrument. But when it came time to do more directing and conducting, you kind of have to just consolidate your skills, as it were. So what's the best way to direct other people or kind of, and I use the term really lightly. The way I always see it is, you know, you just want to get from A to B. There's a million ways you can do it, but you're just driving the car that way, and then you can hang other people's ideas and things on it. But just maybe it's useful if one person is giving it a basic shape. And that for me is the bass line, whether you're playing it on bassoon or keyboard. Yeah, so that familiarity with the bass line, it didn't feel so different moving to a keyboard instrument that's also playing the bass line. And then from the breathing aspects of playing bassoon and the singing aspects that you learn, that those things all come together in different skills. Of course, it feels really different to play keyboard than the act of like playing with a wind instrument, but they're not so dissimilar from each other in several respects.
That's so interesting. It sounds a lot more organic than it appears to people looking at it from the outside. That's really interesting. Thank you so much.
I was just going to add that, sorry, just one more point, just when you're playing it in a continuo group in opera as well, so you're always sat beside your continuo buddies, beside your like the organ players, guitar players, cellists, sometimes violas on the bass line, and you know from that situation how an opera or how a piece works, and also how to make the singers on top sound good or how to help them out. So it's like the kind of a rhythm and bass section of the orchestra. I think you learn a lot from being there, the kind of the engine of the orchestra.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We actually have a question about, well, presumably the bassoon, but actually it could, I suppose, apply to the harpsichord as well. Sally Butt wanted to know, have you ever had an instrument emergency just before a concert?
Yes, I have, Sally. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I had famously, I had a big old disaster at the proms a few years ago. I don't know how many years, maybe 5. Yeah, the proms, as you probably know, is quite like high pressure. It's on TV, on the radio, thousands of people. And yeah, I remember it was a big occasion for the orchestra. It was the Scottish Chamber Orchestra who I worked with for 10 years. And yeah, just ready to go on. Decided to give my bassoon a final clean, which is kind of a complicated process because it's very narrow tube, and you pull kind of a, well, it's not quite a pipe cleaner, but a big version of that through one of the joints just to make sure it's really clean and ready to go. And yeah, my colleagues had all left the dressing room. I was there on my own just doing this final little last minute touch up, and yeah, it got stuck. My little cleaner got stuck inside fast, and all the blood drained from my face. Yeah, was not a good moment. So yeah, I just don't really know what to do in those moments. And yeah, the broadcast was starting, I think in like 3 or 5 minutes. So yeah, ran around like a headless chicken. And a very nice manager of the orchestra took me aside. I said, okay, we're going to sort this. But at the time the concert was beginning, I was in the basement of the Royal Albert Hall in a garage with like some very burly men using, I don't know what, like a tool to try and pull this thing out. Yeah, and it didn't work at all. And they delayed the broadcast. And I just came up to the side, you know, to go on stage, the backstage area. And my colleague was waiting for me, to look a bit impatient as well. I just, you know, shook my head and said, this is not happening. I don't know what to do. And fortunately, because with the Proms, they have several concerts on every day. So the concert after hours, late in the evening, was the Simón Bolívar, the orchestra, the Venezuelan youth orchestra. And one of them had left their bassoon there. So I just stole the top joint of one of his and ran on stage with this very rickety top joint and just hope for the best. And it kind of worked. You know, we got through it. Yeah, had some bad dreams about it afterwards, but yeah,
I'm sure
that wasn't, yeah, bad times.
Yes. Right. Well, I'm afraid there's another bad times question here actually that links into that. In fact, this story may be the answer to this other question. It's a question from Alfonso, and it's, what's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you on stage?
Yeah, I mean, that, I suppose that wasn't an embarrassing thing to happen on stage. It happened off stage. It's hard to know the most embarrassing thing that happened on stage. I mean, I always imagine terrible things happening on stage, and they rarely do. So the thought that they might happen, it looms much larger than the actual things. But yeah, I've had dreadful thoughts of how things could go wrong. Like a typical dream, like even before the bassoon getting stuck incident, is something like an anxiety dream, I guess, is that you're now in Dublin and the concert starts in New York in 5 minutes and you haven't got there yet. And then you arrive 9 hours late, and then you rush on stage to play your concerto, and there's like a museum instrument in front of you, like it's like an elephant's head attached to a hoover, and you've already bowed and you're wearing your tails, and you have to play this instrument, and the orchestral introduction is going through, and then normally you wake up, thankfully, before, oh yeah, the instrument also has a huge reed you've never seen before, and that's broken, but normally you wake up before your first entry, which is good.
It's classic stuff, isn't it? Absolutely is. I had one like that once where I couldn't make my viola play any louder, and I looked down and my strings were made out of cheese. I mean, it's crazy what our brains do. Utterly nuts.
Yeah.
So going back to these videos that you were making so far during lockdown, we've had a question from Alan Gray. He wanted to know if you've trained as a singer or if you're just doing really well without any training. He says your personal ensemble has been one of the highlights of the lockdown for him.
Oh, that's very sweet. No, I haven't had any training as a singer. Like I spent like the first year in university, I worked as a choral scholar. So I got a little bit of money from doing that, but actually I'm just, I don't know, either a not good tenor or a not good baritone. I don't quite fit between the two. Perhaps a singing teacher would have sorted that out. I don't know. So I'm used to singing a little bit, just as part of my job, singing at people or singing notes, but there's no training there. And I think that's especially apparent for my countertenor impersonation, a vaguely offensive one. But I was super grateful looking online. I found a great YouTube tutorial by Justin Kim, who's also famous. Well, he's famous for lots of things. Initially for being Kim Chilia Bartoli is where I first came across him. But he did some great countertenor warm-ups online, and I was much further away from the high notes than I was before. So you know, once I watched that, it made a huge improvement. It's still way off, but yeah, it's amazing what you can find on YouTube. It's just yeah,
fantastic. Well, I thought it was very convincing for what it's worth, but there we go. I think a lot of people found it very convincing, so I guess you're getting away with it, even if you don't feel like
well, we'll see.
So a question, just moving into your artistic director sphere a bit more here. There's a question from Darren Moore, and it's, how long does it take to prepare a big project like a Handel opera?
Yeah, that's a good question. It takes a long time, generally speaking. You always look forward to a big work like that coming back again, because it's so much easier the second time. So the first time, depending on what language it is, it takes a long time to get the language translated, and then to understand the text and where it lies and how the accent of people's voice works, or the accent of the language works. Then if it's an earlier opera, it's important to go through and work out all of the figuring and the figured bass and sort all of those kind of things out. Depending on who you're working with, you might need to work out ornaments. So they're all kind of bits of work that I was used to I expected from before my time working at opera. But what I didn't realize is working in the orchestra is how much else goes on. The conductor, generally speaking, is down the food chain a little bit in operas. Like there's a collaboration with another director who's the stage director, and they normally call the shots for most of the rehearsal period. And it's important to have a good collaboration with them and discuss the ideas and how their vision of the production and the music go together. And that's like a really rewarding process, but it's time consuming as well. So for instance, some of the work we're going to do with Irish Baroque Orchestra and Irish National Opera next year, we've already started working on that. And yeah, it's a fascinating process. Of course, it's all on Zoom, but it takes time. And yeah, so like, whereas you're not working on it solidly all the time, it can be a year in advance, or yeah, you just need more space than you'd imagine just to get all of that information into your brain, and then to formulate a kind of a unified plan going forward that you can kind of share with people that's coherent. And that just takes a while for, maybe it's just me, but my brain is slow, but you need to marinate in it a little bit longer than you would for, say, instrumental music.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That's really useful. On the subject, actually, of big Handel works, we did have a question from Paddy Morton. Any hope of bringing back Handel's Esther with Sestina?
Oh God, that was such a lovely moment. Yeah, we really enjoyed that concert, and that version of Esther, I don't think it had been performed in Ireland for hundreds of years. It used to be an important work that was performed in Dublin, like Audacious and Galatea and Esther were two kind of firm favourites. Yeah, well, I don't know. Hopefully the next time will be like less than another 200 years, however long it was, maybe 300 years. But yeah, it's just such beautiful music and such an amazing work. It starts out so small scale and then ends with like the world's longest chorus. I think that like that last chorus was something like between 10 and 20 minutes long, and it's got like loads of different Alleluia choruses inside it. It just never ended. No, it's great memories. I'm glad that it's staying with people like Paddy as well.
Yeah, great. It would be good to bring that back, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You talk about the quotation of the Hallelujah chorus there. That brings us on quite nicely to another question. It's quite a long one from Annika Scott, horn player at IBO. So the question is, well, actually, it's a statement to start with. Attitudes have changed over the years regarding plagiarism and copyright, but back in the 18th century, musicians and audiences thought differently. What's the most audacious piece of musical thievery from any point in time that you can think of? Or if you could have had any composer appropriate another's work and reform it in their own image, what would you have liked to happen and why?
Wow, that's a great, I shouldn't expect any less of a question from Annika. Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's fascinating to see how, like, it wasn't, as she mentions, it wasn't such a big deal necessarily to take other people's works and appropriate them, especially in the 18th century and before. That kind of changed afterwards. And also composers stealing from themselves, like, which got to be totally legitimate, right? Like, but sometimes people are critical of Handel, even in the Messiah. Some of the choruses he reworked from earlier, like Italian cantatas for two voices. It's actually really fascinating to go back to those pieces and see from such a tiny little sketch. It's beautiful in its own right, but how he can expand it into these like amazing choruses. But yeah, to try and think of examples, I know that there were a couple of composers in Dublin, like a classical composer, classical era called Giordani, and he was chased out of Dublin for plagiarism. So it must have been really bad if he was plagiarizing things to such an extent that people were actually offended by it. And another Irish singer, Michael Kelly, he was often said to not be capable of writing his own music, and he was also, they gave him a hard time for it. Another slightly, well, it's a slight tangent, but I know that the Beggar's Opera was quite a big deal in Dublin too, which of course was a parody of Italian operas, and it was like brought back to basics, a very simple opera, funny, kind of a mud on the boots, kind of a everyman opera. And this guy Giordani didn't get the parody of it. He said, "This is a really basic piece. I should Italianize it." So he just made a very Italian version for Dublin, which also totally tanked because he missed the whole point of being the first way. But if you could appropriate music, I know it's such a great question. I mean, I totally, as a child, I really loved when, like, are you aware of Hooked on Classics? Is that a thing for you? They used to add drum beats in the 80s to classical music.
Wow.
And I thought that was the best thing ever. That was my entry drug into classical music. And I just thought that was the best thing ever. And I actually have a few friends in the early music business who would be more likely to go to the gym if they could listen to like Baroque hits with drum beats in the background. So I remember the disadvantage of that is that once the drum beat's taken away, at least in my case as a child, I was bitterly disappointed. I loved the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto with a drum beat, and it just didn't feel the same without. But yeah, your tastes grow as you get older, hopefully.
Wow, that's fantastic. The Mendelssohn Violin Concerto with a drum beat. Okay.
You have to listen to it. It's worth it. It's on Spotify and everywhere. Yeah. It's called Hooked on Mendelssohn.
Hooked on Mendelssohn. Thank you. I will make a note of that. You touched there on some of the research that you do into the Irish Baroque period, which is a period, of course, that we're discovering with you as an orchestra over the next few years with our innovative and fascinating programming. We've had a question from Rianne Davies, who asks, what Irish music sources were you researching before the lockdown? And I assume that you're still continuing your research within the lockdown. So I guess which Irish sources in particular are you looking at?
Well, it's just an amazing field of study. Like when I started out, or when I started to become interested as a teenager, I guess, or before. I remember in primary school we used to have a little book about like 2 pages on different aspects of Irish history, and the one that really got my imagination going was just 2 pages on Handel. It was mostly pictures, and I just remember going, "God, that's in my city." And then I remember asking my parents to see where it was performed and going to visit it. And then as I get older, just reading a bit more around that, because mostly it's for instance with that, there are really 2 big events in Irish history in classical music. I mean, a lot happened, but what most people would know about is that Handel came to Dublin to perform Messiah in 1742, and also that John Field, the pianist and composer of nocturnes, was born in Ireland too. Of course, he moved out quite early on. But I just always willed there to be more information about what was going on, how the world worked back then. And it was so dispiriting to read so many of the books at the time that you just might mention as a side note. Handel was in Dublin. He didn't know what to expect when he got there, so he wrote the score of Messiah very simply, which is true. But actually, the more we explore, we know that he knew a lot about what was going on in Dublin, and what was going on was first rate. And the more you dig into this, there's a variety of reasons that maybe it's been a kind of a side of Irish culture that we haven't explored as much as we might. But it just, and like so many of these research topics, it just like door after door opens, and more and more it becomes richer all the time. So now I'm at the point where like everything is fascinating. I feel like I know much less than I did at the beginning, and yet there's so much, and it's just now really a job. I have to be really careful not to become too insular, too introverted with that information, and try to share it and get other people on board, and because it's fascinating, and yeah, I just want other people to know the story as well, of this kind of classical music in Ireland, that we have much bigger history and heritage than people realise. And with the Irish Baroque Orchestra over the last few years, we've been yeah, exploring so much. And I realise I haven't answered Rianne's question at all after all of that. But actually, right now, if you ask, the last book that came through the door was a book I didn't know about, and I'm terribly ashamed about that. It's called The Theatre in Dublin, 1745 to 1820, which doesn't sound like the most catchy title. But actually it's brilliant, and it's some historians have just gone through all of the theatres and tried to reconstruct them and what they might have looked like, and it's really fascinating when it comes to Fishamble Street, where Messiah was first performed. I assume there wasn't very much information, but there's a lot, and you can really now I can at least envisage just a space for that. And I think that's so important with the research. Is of course you have the music, which is very often like top rate when it comes to what Handel performed in Dublin. It's the best. But just as exciting for me anyway is the social context of who he was playing for, who his audience was, and that really affected how he changed. Like for instance with Handel, how he recomposed Messiah once he arrived in Dublin to suit the singers that he found here. So he was always very lithe to react to the situations he found. And yeah, there was plenty for him to explore in Dublin. There was a lot going on. There was a man about the same time that Handel was in Dublin called Mr. Charles the Hungarian. He's a horn player. I don't know why, every time I read about him, I just imagine a really big moustache. And he was trying to steal a march on Handel by presenting lots of Handel's works at the same time that Handel was in Dublin, but separately, which must have been a kind of an annoyance to Handel. But yeah, he's introducing lots of new instruments to Ireland. Like he said, this is the Shalamone, the clarinet, which hasn't been heard in this kingdom before. And we have a whole list of his concert programs. And there was also a woman called Madame Violante and her commodious booth, whatever that was. I think she was like a high wire artist. And she got shut down by the Dublin government at the time for exposing her brawny parts, whatever they were. But her commodious booth was shut down shortly after that. But yeah, so the more you read into the context, look at newspapers, just a richer a tapestry it becomes, really.
Fantastic, thank you. That's fascinating. Commodious booth. So actually, we had a question from Diego Folkias, who said he wanted to know, you've got such a broad spread of what you're doing, the artistic strand, the research, there's so much going on. How do you find the energy to do all of this, and how do you maintain it?
Well, yeah, I've got an expensive team of people who work for me, a pet stylist, therapists, nutritionists. No, I think coffee goes a long way to that kind of creativity when it's needed. Like I find that's probably fueling quite a lot. And that's a good point about energy. Like, where does anybody find their energy from? I guess people who choose the slippery slope of performance often have a reason that's like a fire in their belly or some kind of volcano in their personality that produces you know, some kind of, if you want to call it creativity. But often there's a downside to that, like with many performers. So it's adrenaline charged. And then the downside is, yeah, like the other side of clowns, for instance, not to make it too depressing early on. But yeah, it tends to come in bursts, and that there's a need to create, or just suddenly it comes in like a fiery moment of, yeah, just something occurs to you and you have to do it. But what I mean by the downside is that, like, I think once you expend a lot of energy, you have to make up for it somewhere else. Like that's why it's kind of quite interesting about lockdown is for many musicians, it's so many years just on the go with these amazing highs, one after the other. So it's nice actually just to, a small advantage of this is just be able to kind of catch up with yourself and recalibrate a little bit, so that kind of balance is evened out a little bit, which I think is one of the small advances. But yeah, to answer your question, coffee.
Fantastic. So actually my next question was going to be, how do you switch off from all of it then? But is that just the downward curve of the upward energy naturally bringing you down again?
It's so important to have something else in your life, which is really hard as musicians, because it's such an all-encompassing kind of profession. We are our music, and it's the same for dancers and painters, all kinds of different artists. But it is I'm dishing out advice that I find hard to take myself. But I think it's just so important to have something else, like whether it's you're interested in fitness, or it's just something else that makes you tick. And if you're working at something that, sometimes you have to do work that you don't enjoy so much, that's normal, like in anybody's life. But it's important to keep connected with your own personal inspiration. That's something that really makes you tick artistically. Like I still do a lot of teaching online, and there's so many of my students are great at so many things. They're so creative in different aspects. And I think that's just to be encouraged, that especially nowadays, younger people, they just need to kind of broaden their portfolios. I think the future is there, and people who are very flexible and have lots of different things that they can do, rather than just saying, I want just a job in an orchestra. It's hard enough to obtain, but yeah.
Yes, thank you. Really interesting. I've just got a few questions really to sum up, just some very relaxed ones actually. Firstly, I'm curious, what would your specialist subject be if you were on Mastermind?
That is a good point. I think at the moment, and probably because we're offline and nobody can ask me questions on this, I'll probably see Simpsons season 12. I'm pretty well up on that just at the moment.
Wow, I did not see that coming.
But I'm really happy I can't be tested on that. Yeah,
that's great. The next one: are there any books holding up your device at the moment, and if so, what are they?
Yes, actually, one is the poor book that I just mentioned, the Theatre in Dublin book. It's actually really big, so it's useful for holding up Zoom meetings. And above that is the Die Entführung auf dem Serail, so it's Sarai. So that's the opera that we should have been working on at the moment with the Irish National Opera. We're trying to find another way to reinvent that for the future. So that's also a big old book. So they're the two, that are underneath at the moment.
Super. Thank you so much. I think that's just about everything for today. We may well do another one in a few weeks' time. We will absolutely not attempt to do a Facebook Live broadcast of it, because we've learned that does not work for us. We learned the hard way. So I just have a few housekeeping things really to sum up the end of this broadcast. Firstly, this will be available to watch online. It's going to be in all the usual places on social media. A week today, you are going on BBC Radio 3's In Tune programme. I think it's about 6:20 in the evening, chatting about our digital programming. So thank you so much for taking that on.
No, it's great. I'm looking forward to sharing that. Well, Ali, you've been working so hard at that, and it's worth checking out Irish Baroque Orchestra's website to see all we've been up to. And there's lots of material released on Wednesdays. For the most part, but we're going to share that with the wider world too.
Thank you. We need to ask everybody, of course, to follow us on YouTube, because if we get 1,000 subscribers, we can monetize it. Do you know how many more we need, Peter?
Is it like more than 100?
It is quite significantly more than 100. It's 958.
Right. Okay.
But if all of our Facebook followers followed us on YouTube, we'd be laughing. We'd be laughing all the way to the bank.
Right, so we should make this happen.
So we'll make this happen. And the next feature that I'm hoping to do will be with Rachel Podger in about a month on a similar platform. It will emphatically not, I repeat, not be a Facebook Live, because, as I say, we've learned our lesson. Thank you for your patience, Peter. You've been brilliant.
No, thank you.
Thank you. And I will put this online, and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the sun.
Thanks, Alia.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.